Welcome to the first episode of Informational Medicine, InfoMeds for short, where today I'll be talking about wealth disparity, specifically the wealth gap in the United States and how it impacts education. I'm Matthew Walden, and I'll begin today's segment. InfoMeds! So what is wealth disparity? Wealth disparity is looking at the stratification of economic resources and seeing who has more compared to others. Stratification merely means distribution. In this, inequalities arise because some individuals receive resources more so than others because of social categories they're born into. Categories like individual's race and or sex. An obvious example of this is the gender pay gap, where women are receiving 79 cents to every $1 a man makes. This gap only increases for women of color. Other examples of wealth disparity that are not so obvious are economic segregation based on school districts that are formed because of redlining and were enforced by white flight. Redlining was a form of institutional racism that denied housing loans to people of color based on the location of the neighborhood. Discrimination based on race. This is an example of de jure segregation, which is legal segregation based on law. The Fair Housing Act, passed in 1968, may have put an end to redlining, but the social climate of America still feared people of color, and some took advantage of this to make a lot of money. Side note, we live in a capitalistic society that has linked money to social status, even if this money was earned in an unethical manner. Okay, back to this segment. So in this fear came white flight. Real estate agents would go to the houses of Caucasian individuals and tell them that their property would depreciate once a colored person moves into their neighborhood. The agent would then offer them cash less than what their property was actually worth, pretending like they're taking on the liability. The scheme was that they would then sell the house to a colored person for more what they paid for it, allowing them to repeat the whole process again while making a profit. This caused residential concentration of colored people, a form of de facto segregation, or segregation as a matter of fact. This was detrimental for communities because once the white families moved out because of white flight, they took their resources with them, creating resource deserts because of the income gap between people of color and Caucasians. This is how the wealth gap began to affect education in the United States and how it still does today. It affects education since public schools are funded based on property and general taxes of the people who live in the districts. This being in resource deserts that lacked educational funds because people who live in them do not make as much as others, so their taxable income is less. There's a theory called the Matthew effect, which is about accumulative advantages or disadvantages. In other terms, a snowball effect. Using this to analyze children from K to 12th grade in resource deserts, we can conclude that since students in educational deserts do not have educational resources, they score lower on standardized testing. Since they score lower on standardized tests, they do not qualify for scholarships, allowing them to pursue higher education. Since they can't afford higher education because of the lack of scholarships, their income level becomes limited, making intergenerational social mobility impossible, allowing this cycle to repeat itself for their own children. The short-term effect of this educational resource inequality is not being able to attend or even excel in college, but the long-term effect is much worse. Since they're unable to attend college, intra-generational mobility, which is social mobility within one's lifetime, is near impossible because higher education has always been seen as the main vehicle to change your social class. This was the case during the early 1970s and still is today. Most jobs that provide the necessities for a decent standard of living require college degrees. But college degrees are becoming harder to obtain because of the increased cost of tuition. Some colleges, like Chicago State University, are offering micro grants along with programs teaching study skills to students from these deserts. But this is not enough. It's not enough because it's too late in one's educational career. To learn more about higher education, watch segment 2, presented by David Lewis.